Welcome to my theological book review, and today's book is The Messiah Confrontation, Pharisees versus Sadducees and the Death of Jesus, written by Israel Knohl and published by University of Nebraska Press 2022, and it's translated from the Hebrew by David Meisel. So Knohl's book traces the development of the messianic concept through the Hebrew scriptures and into the time of Jesus. And his goal is to demonstrate that Jesus' trial and the decisions that came out of it were the result of inter-Jewish disagreement on the exact nature of the Messiah, as well as to argue that Jesus himself did consider himself to be a messianic figure for whom crucifixion was inevitable. Knohl argues that Jesus' messianic self-understanding was a mix of Qumran and Pharisaic ideas, both of which stood clearly against the Sadducee position, remembering, of course, that the Sadducees were in charge of the trial of Jesus. The first half of Knohl's book reviews the various positions of messianic images in the Hebrew scriptures, ranging from a military king to a providing father, to Davidic descendant, to high priest, and later on in Isaiah to that of a suffering servant. In addition to looking at these various images, he also delineates the two perspectives that the Messiah was a this time figure, come in the present moment, and the perspective that the Messiah was a future anticipated figure who would come at the end to judge. Combined with this, he also reviews the positions on whether or not the God could become incarnate in the Messiah, whether there could be some form of divine human hybrid, elaborating that there is a distinction for the Sadducees who said such a thing was not possible, and the Qumran Essene community who developed their imagery from Daniel, that there could be such a hybrid in some kind of divine human form. So after covering all of that, Knohl's book then moves into detailed descriptions of the Pharisaic, Sadducean, and Essene positions on these various things. The Sadducees were non-messianic. They rejected any kind of human-divine hybrid as blasphemy, which means they also rejected resurrection. The Pharisees, on the contrary, believed in resurrection. They also believed in a this-time Messiah, specifically a king Messiah who would overthrow imperial powers. Now, the Qumran position affirmed also a human divine Messiah. However, they did not believe in a kingly Messiah, but rather they took up the imagery in Isaiah that the Messiah was coming to specifically suffer for the sins of others, and particularly the whole people of Israel. In the second to last chapter, Knohl locates Jesus within this milieu, presenting him as having a mix of Pharisaic and Essene beliefs. Jesus sees himself as a this-time Messiah. He believes in resurrection. He sees himself as a divine human son of man. However, rather than being a military figure, he embodies the Qumran idea that the Messiah comes to suffer and die for the people. And in this context, actually, Knohl argues that his words at the trial that we see in Mark 14 can be better understood, particularly when Jesus claims himself to be the Son of Man. According to Knohl, this is understood as a Pharisaic Essene claim to divinity, which the Sadducees also understand to be a claim to divinity, and thus he's accused of blasphemy. Now, because Jesus embraces the Qumran messianic imagery, he sees himself as a suffering servant who must die, and thus he doesn't refute the Sadducean accusations. Now, in the final chapter, Knohl argues that the trial of Jesus is not one of traditional Jews versus the radical Jesus with outrageous and heretical ideas, which has so often been a trope of Christology. Rather, the trial is an example of inter-Jewish conflict over long-standing issues regarding messianic imagery that in this particular case has deadly consequences. Now, Knohl incorrectly assigns the blame for this later Jewish Christian hostility to Paul. He doesn't seem to be aware of the new Pauline schools of thought, particularly the Paul within Judaism school. It's okay. But he does nevertheless clearly make the case that Jesus' trial cannot be used as an argument to pit the Jewish communities against Jesus or vice versa. And in that way, his research contributes towards the movement for a non-supersessionist Christology that is grounded in historical research. So again, that's The Messiah Confrontation. It's published by University of Nebraska Press, and I recommend it.